Hi, I'm Rachel Monroe, 33, from Charleston, South Carolina. And this is the story of how I canceled my wedding, sold my ring, and turned humiliation into a celebration of my own damn life. For 3 years, I was engaged to Alexander Alex Preston, a tall, sandy-haired CPA with a polished smile and a mother who never thought I was good enough for him. Or for anyone, really. But to understand how I ended up standing alone in a bakery, staring at a receipt with my name on it for a wedding cake I didn't remember paying for, you need to hear the whole story. Not just the ending where I found my spine, but the beginning, where I slowly, imperceptibly, started to lose it. I met Alex at a charity gala 5 years ago. I was covering it for the Charleston Chronicle, where I work as a features editor. He was there because, well, that's what Prestons do. Attend galas, write checks with just enough zeros to be mentioned in the society pages, and network with other people who summer on Kiowa Island. I was the girl in the black dress I'd worn to 3 other events that year, notebook in hand, trying to look like I belonged among crystal chandeliers and people who used summer as a verb. "You're not drinking the champagne," he said, appearing at my elbow as I scribbled notes about the event's decor. "It's actually quite good. Not the usual fundraiser swill." I looked up into blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Working," I explained, holding up my notebook. "Can't exactly take notes when I'm tipsy." "Ah, press. Let me guess. Charleston City paper?" "Chronicle," I corrected, oddly pleased he hadn't assumed I was someone's +1. "Even better. My mother reads your features section religiously. Usually to criticize it, but still, devoted readership." I laughed, and something shifted in the room. That subtle tilt of the universe when you meet someone and some primitive part of your brain whispers, "Pay attention to this moment. Remember it." What I didn't know then, couldn't have known, was that I should have heeded a different whisper. The warning kind. The one that might have said, "Notice how he mentioned his mother in the first 2 minutes of meeting you. This is foreshadowing, Rachel. This is your future calling." But his smile was disarming, and when he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. Our first date was at a small French bistro where the waiter knew him by name. He ordered in, confident French, held my chair, asked insightful questions about my work. By dessert, I was halfway to smitten. By the 3rd date, I was fully there. It was only on our 6th date that I met Eleanor Preston. Alex had mentioned brunch at his parents' home so casually that I didn't recognize it for the evaluation it was. I wore a blue sundress, brought flowers, and prepared to be charming. What I wasn't prepared for was Eleanor herself, a human fortress of pearls, precision-highlighted blonde hair, and southern passive aggression elevated to an art form. "Rachel," she said, taking my offered flowers, with the enthusiasm of someone accepting a dead mouse. "How colorful. Alex mentioned you work for a newspaper?" "The Chronicle," I confirmed, already feeling the first prickle of unease. "I'm the features editor." "That must be so interesting," she murmured, handing the flowers to their housekeeper without a glance. "We always thought Alex would end up with someone in a more traditional field. Caroline's friends are mostly in interior design or non-profit development." Caroline, Alex's sister, looked up from her phone just long enough to assess me with a quick up-down glance that somehow communicated I'd been measured and found wanting. "Mom, Rachel's work is fascinating," Alex said, his hand warm on my lower back. "She just finished a series on historical preservation in the city that was nominated for a regional press award." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, isn't that nice? Local journalism is so important. Someone has to cover the garden club meetings after all." I should have recognized it then. The slight tightening of Alex's smile, the way he didn't quite defend me, but rather changed the subject. The first subtle capitulation in what would become a pattern so familiar, I'd stopped noticing it was happening. Brunch. was an exercise in careful navigation. The food was beautiful but oddly flavorless. Poached eggs that tasted of nothing. Asparagus so undercooked it was practically alive. Toast that had been scraped free of nearly all its butter. "Eleanor doesn't believe in salt," Alex whispered when his mother left to fetch coffee. "Says it's vulgar." I nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Already adapting. Already making excuses. Already failing the test I didn't know I was taking. Over. The following months, I fell deeply for Alex. He was thoughtful, bringing me coffee from my favorite shop when he knew I was on deadline. He was passionate about architecture and civic planning, often dragging me to obscure lectures that I found surprisingly fascinating. He could debate politics without aggression, and admitted when he didn't know something. In short, he seemed nothing like the country club stereotype his family embodied. "They're just traditional," he'd say, when I mentioned his mother's thinly veiled insults or his father's habit of talking about money in ways designed to highlight that I didn't have any. "They'll warm up once they know you better." I believed him, because I wanted to. Because when it was just us, in my small but charming apartment with its overflowing bookshelves and mismatched furniture, Alex seemed happy. Seemed free. We'd cook together, argue pleasantly about films, make love with a connection that felt genuine and deep. It was only in hindsight that I realized how rarely we spent time at his sleek downtown condo, how often our plans shifted to accommodate his mother's impromptu dinner invitations, how he'd check his phone when it lit up with her name, no matter what we were doing. The proposal came after 2 years of dating, on a weekend trip to Savannah. It was perfect. A waterfront restaurant at sunset, Alex down on one knee, a platinum solitaire ring that caught the light in a way that made my heart stutter. I said yes through happy tears, genuinely believing we were starting our life together. Our life. Not his family's life with me as a reluctant appendage. The descent was so gradual I barely noticed it happening. Like the proverbial frog in slowly heating water, I adjusted to each new temperature without realizing I was being cooked alive. First, it was the ring. "Eleanor thinks the setting is a bit common," Alex mentioned casually a week after the proposal. "She's offered to have her jeweler reset it into something more unique." I refused, of course. The ring was beautiful, and more importantly, it was what Alex had chosen. Or so I thought, until his sister Caroline let slip months later that Eleanor had gone with him to select it, rejecting the first 3 he'd favored. Then it was the wedding planning. What should have been joyful became an elaborate power struggle disguised as etiquette and tradition. Preston weddings are always at St. Michael's, Eleanor informed me over tea at her home, where I'd been summoned to discuss details. Not invited. Summoned via a text from Alex saying his mother wanted to help. "Actually, we were thinking of the botanical gardens," I said. Alex and I love the idea of an outdoor ceremony. Eleanor's laugh was a delicate, dismissive tinkle. "Oh, Rachel, that's not really suitable. The Prestons have been married at St. Michael's for generations. Besides, outdoor weddings are so unpredictable and common." Later, Alex soothed my frustration with promises of compromise. "We'll make it our own within the tradition," he said. "It's important to Mom, but we'll find ways to make it feel like us." But us began to feel increasingly like them. The guest list expanded to include dozens of Preston family connections I'd never met. The color scheme shifted from the blues and greens I loved to Eleanor's preferred palette of blush and ivory. The menu transformed from the southern comfort food we'd envisioned to fussy canapes and imported delicacies. "You don't want people to think we can't afford a proper wedding," Alex said when I complained. "My parents' friends have certain expectations." "It's not about affording it," I argued. "It's about having a celebration that actually reflects who we are." "This is who we are, Rach," he said, sounding genuinely confused. "I'm a Preston." It was the first time I felt that cold flicker of doubt. Not about loving Alex, but about what loving Alex would cost me. The dress became another battlefield. Eleanor insisted on accompanying us to the bridal salon. Us, being me, her, Caroline, and my best friend Mia, who disliked Eleanor with an intensity that made her presence both a comfort and a complication. "You'll want something slimming," Eleanor announced as the consultant brought out gowns in my preferred A-line style. "Something with structure. Your figure needs help." I caught Mia's eyes widening behind Eleanor's back. "Actually," I said, with a firmness that surprised me, "I like A-line dresses. They suit my body type." Eleanor's smile was tight. "Of course you think so, dear. But trust me, with your hips, you need something more architectural. Caroline, show her the one we discussed." Caroline, ever the loyal soldier, pulled up a photo on her phone. A mermaid-style gown with a corseted waist that looked both uncomfortable and nothing like anything I'd ever choose for myself. "It's very structured," I managed. "It's Marchesa," Caroline said, as if this explained everything. "And it would make you look at least 10 pounds lighter." I tried on 7 dresses that day. None of them were what I wanted. All of them were what Eleanor insisted would flatter me, which seemed to be code for disguise what I find unacceptable about your body. When I finally found one that made me feel beautiful, a simple silk, sheath with delicate beading, Eleanor pronounced it juvenile and inappropriate for a Preston wedding. Somehow, I left the salon having ordered the dress Eleanor wanted, a size smaller than I currently wore, because, as she put it, every bride loses weight before the wedding. It'll motivate you. That night, I cried in the bathroom while Alex was asleep. It was the first time I admitted to myself that something was deeply wrong. The real problems began once we were officially in the wedding planning phase. What should have been a joyful time of building our future together instead became a slow, systematic dismantling of my autonomy. Eleanor inserted herself into every decision, from the invitations, cream, not white, with the Preston family crest embossed at the top, to the seating arrangements, carefully engineered to minimize contact with my colorful relatives from Alabama. Wish I could say I stood my ground, that I fought for the wedding we wanted. But the truth is messier. I retreated, bit by bit, conceding ground to keep the peace. Alex's response to conflict with his mother was to either appease her or avoid her entirely, and since avoidance wasn't an option with wedding planning, appeasement became our default. "It's just one day," he'd say whenever I expressed frustration. "After that, it'll be just us." But it was never just us. Even in our most intimate moments, the specter of his family loomed. Like the night 6 months before the wedding, when Alex moved from my living room to my bedroom, his kisses heavy with wine and affection. "I've been thinking," he murmured against my neck as we undressed each other, "about where we'll live after the wedding." I was distracted by his hands, by the familiar warmth of his skin against mine. "Mom thinks we should consider the carriage house on their property, just until we find something suitable in the right neighborhood." I froze, his words like ice water on my desire. "The carriage house? On your parents' property?" He nodded, apparently not noticing my sudden tension. "It makes financial sense. We could save for a proper home in south of Broad." His hands continued their path down my body, but I felt suddenly disconnected, watching from somewhere outside, myself. "Alex," I said, sitting up and pulling the sheet around me. "I don't want to live in your parents' carriage house. I want our own place, even if it's small, even if it's not in the right neighborhood." He sighed, flopping onto his back. "This is exactly what Dad said would happen. You're being emotional rather than practical. You discussed this with your father before talking to me?" "Of course. He handles the family properties." I stared at him. This man I thought I knew, and saw for the first time the reality of what I was marrying into. Not just Alex, but a system where decisions about our life together were family discussions, where my input was secondary to Preston tradition and preference. "I'm not living in your parents' carriage house," I said firmly. That's not up for debate. Alex's expression darkened. You know, sometimes I think you don't understand what it means to be part of my family. The Prestons have certain expectations, certain traditions. You can't just dismiss them because they don't fit your bohemian sensibilities. Bohemian? Because I want to live with my husband without his mother dropping by unannounced? That's not bohemian, Alex. That's normal. He stood up, reaching for his clothes. I can see you're not in a reasonable mood. We'll discuss this later. As I watched him dress, I felt a hollowness in my chest that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with clarity. In that moment, naked and suddenly cold in my own bedroom, I saw with perfect clarity that Alex had never really left his mother's house, not in any way that mattered. That night marked a turning point. The sex, once a genuine connection between us, became performative, a dutiful act that left me feeling increasingly disconnected from both Alex and myself. I found myself making excuses, developing conveniently timed headaches or work deadlines. When we did have sex, I felt like I was watching from a distance, going through motions that had once held meaning, but now felt like another form of capitulation. The worst part was that Alex didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he attributed it to wedding stress, rather than the growing realization that I was engaged to a man who would not, prioritize our relationship over his family's expectations. 3 months before the wedding, the Prestons took their annual trip to their vacation home in the Hamptons. I was not invited. It's a family tradition, Alex explained, packing his suitcase while I watched from the bedroom doorway. We've been doing this trip since I was a kid. I'm going to be family in 3 months, I pointed out. Shouldn't I be included in family traditions? He didn't look up from his packing. Mom thinks it's important to maintain some traditions just for the core family. Besides, don't you have that series deadline coming up? The series was a major project I'd been working on for months, an in-depth exploration of gentrification in historic Charleston neighborhoods. It was important work I was proud of. But in that moment it felt like an excuse, a convenient reason to exclude me. You could have at least asked if I wanted to come, I said quietly. Alex finally looked up, his expression a mixture of impatience and confusion. Rach, it's 2 weeks. It's not a big deal. You can use the time to finalize the seating chart and check on the catering details. Shouldn't we be doing those things together? You know I'm not good at that stuff. Besides, Mom has strong opinions about the catering. Of course she did. Eleanor had strong opinions about everything related to the wedding, most of which directly contradicted my own preferences. And Alex, ever the dutiful son, inevitably sided with her, not through direct confrontation, but through 1,000 small surrenders. While they were away, I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. But evenings were lonely, filled with too much time to think about what I was walking into. Alex called daily, but our conversations were surface level. Updates about his golf game, complaints about his sister's new boyfriend, comments about how much his mother was looking forward to having me in the family properly. It was during this time that I finally confided in Mia about my growing doubts. I don't think I can do this, I admitted over wine on my small balcony, the Charleston, night heavy with jasmine and humidity. I love him, but I don't think I can be what his family wants. Mia, never one to mince words, took a long sip of her wine before responding. Honey, the question isn't whether you can be what they want. It's whether Alex can be what you need. And from where I'm sitting, that answer is looking like a big, fat no. He's caught in the middle, I argued, though even to my own ears it sounded weak. It's hard for him. Is it? Because it seems to me like it's hardest for you. When's the last time he stood up to his mother for you? When's the last time he chose your happiness over her preferences? I couldn't answer, and that silence was deafening. When Alex returned from the Hamptons, Tanned and relaxed, he brought Eleanor's suggestions for last-minute wedding changes. Different flowers because the ones I'd chosen were too informal. A revised reception timeline that cut the dancing. In favor of extended toasts from Preston family friends. A request that my cousin Jamie not bring his male partner because certain older family members might be uncomfortable. Each suggestion felt like another brick in the wall being built between the life I wanted and the life I was agreeing to. And with each brick, I felt myself disappearing a little more. The final straw came 6 weeks before the wedding. I'd been handling what I thought were the final details, confirming RSVPs, checking in with vendors, finalizing the timeline. Alex had been largely absent from these tasks, citing work deadlines and family obligations, which was why I was surprised when the wedding planner, Eleanor's choice of course, called to confirm that Alex had changed the honeymoon destination. "I'm sorry," I said, certain I'd misheard. "Changed it from where to where?" "From Bali to the south of France," she replied, sounding confused by my confusion. "Mr. Preston said it was confirmed with you last week. His mother felt Bali was too adventurous. The south of France is much more appropriate for a Preston honeymoon." I hung up and immediately called Alex, my hands shaking with an anger that surprised me with its intensity. "Did you change our honeymoon?" I demanded when he answered. A pause. "Mom thought the south of France would be better. You know how she feels about Southeast Asia. Too unpredictable, too many health concerns." "I don't care what your mother thinks about our honeymoon, Alex. We chose Bali together. We booked Bali together. Actually," he said, his voice taking on that careful tone he used when navigating between me and his mother's wishes, "I never officially booked Bali. Mom's travel agent held the France reservations instead. It's actually a much better property. 5 stars, private beach access, Michelin-starred restaurant on site." I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted in a bone-deep way that had nothing to do with wedding planning and everything to do with the slow erosion of my voice in our relationship. "Did it occur to you to discuss this with me?" I asked quietly. "Not your mother, not her travel agent. Me, your fiancé, the person you're supposedly building a life with." "Rachel, you're overreacting. It's still a luxury honeymoon. Most people would be thrilled. I'm not most people. I'm me. And I wanted Bali because we talked about it together. We planned it together. This was supposed to be our trip, Alex. Not your mother's vision of an appropriate Preston honeymoon." "Look," he said, and I could hear the forced patience in his voice. "I'm heading into a meeting. We can discuss this later. But I really think you'll love the France itinerary once you see it. Mom put a lot of thought into it." After we hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, staring at the engagement photos on my wall. Alex and I laughing on the battery, my ring catching the sunlight, both of us looking happy and in love. I tried to reconcile that image with the reality of what our relationship had become. A constant negotiation where I always seemed to be the one giving ground. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, mentally cataloging all the ways I'd compromised, all the times I'd swallowed my preferences in favor of Preston traditions and Eleanor's vision, the dress I didn't love, the venue that wasn't our choice, the guest list populated by strangers, the honeymoon hijacked without my input. And somewhere in those dark hours, a terrible clarity emerged. This wasn't pre-wedding jitters. This was my instinct for self-preservation finally overriding my capacity for compromise. The next day, I went to the bakery to finalize the cake, an elaborate 5-tier creation that Eleanor had selected despite my preference for something simpler. I expected to make the final payment, confirm the delivery details, and leave. Instead, I discovered that every major wedding expense had been paid for from my accounts. Not our joint account, not Alex's personal accounts, but mine. The savings I'd built over years of careful budgeting The money I'd set aside for eventually buying a home, for traveling, for building the life I wanted, gone, spent on a wedding that increasingly felt like someone else's. When I confronted Alex that evening, his response was so cavalier it took my breath away. "Babe, you said we'd handle it together. You make more steady income. It just made sense." I stared at him like he'd grown horns. "And you didn't think to tell me you were draining my savings account?" He sighed. "Don't make this dramatic, Rach. My family was already helping with your dress, remember?" The dress. A size too small, picked by Eleanor because it'll motivate you. That night, I took off the ring. Platinum band, solitaire diamond. Worn smooth where I'd absent-mindedly spun it during long editing sessions. I stared at it for a long time. Then I listed it, $12,500, and within hours, it was sold. The next day, I walked into the same venue and asked about transferring the reservation. "You're the primary signer," the coordinator said. "You can do whatever you want." And that's when the idea struck me. Same date, same venue, but not the same wedding. I sent out new invitations. "Rachel Monroe requests your presence not for a union, but for a celebration of independence. Come hungry, come dressed to dance, come ready to toast to freedom." Some people thought it was a joke. Some thought I was losing my mind. But on June 18th, the place was full. My best friend Mia flew in from Portland. My cousins from Birmingham came in a van full of food. My dad wore his best boots and brought his guitar. Even my old college editor came, and he brought champagne. And the man standing next to me when I gave my toast? Ethan Davis. A childhood friend I'd reconnected with just 2 weeks before, when I ran into him at the farmer's market. He brought peaches. I brought broken pride. Turned out, he'd always had a thing for me. I didn't marry him. Not yet. But when we danced that night under the hanging lanterns, barefoot and laughing, I knew I'd found something better than a wedding. I'd found myself again. And Eleanor Preston. She came, uninvited. She stood in the back in pearls and a sour face. I raised my glass to her. "Cheers, Eleanor. I'm not your daughter-in-law, but tonight I'm the woman who paid for everything and smiled while doing it." Everyone clapped. She left. I stayed. And I've never looked back. It's been a year since the non-wedding. Alex eventually started dating Carolyn's friend Tabitha, who has the right pedigree and the right deference to Eleanor's opinions. I hear they're engaged now, with a wedding planned at St. Michael's. I wish them well, and I mean that sincerely. Some people are perfectly suited to the life the Prestons offer, with its security and tradition and carefully maintained appearances. I'm just not one of them. As for me, I used what was left of the ring money to put a down payment on a small cottage in the historic district, not south of Broad, not prestigious by Preston standards, but mine, all mine. I've since been promoted at the Chronicle. My series on gentrification won that regional award after all, and yes, Ethan and I are still seeing each other. Turns out, when you're with someone who actually sees you, really sees you, relationships are a lot less exhausting. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I'd gone through with the wedding, if I'd continued disappearing piece by piece, compromising until there was nothing left to give. It's a sobering thought. But then I remember dancing barefoot at my non-wedding, surrounded by people who loved me for exactly who I am, and I know I made the only choice that would have allowed me to keep living truthfully in my own skin. Eleanor Preston taught me an unexpected lesson. There are some prices too high to pay for belonging. Some compromises that cost you your very self. In the end, I didn't need a wedding to find happy ever after. I just needed the courage to write my own story, on my own terms. And that, as it turns out, is the greatest love story of all.